For 10 years, Michael Carter believed his parents were doing just fine. His brothers told him so every time he called while he worked hundreds of miles away, building a company from nothing and sending money home like clockwork. That's why he finally drove back to Cleveland with an apartment already furnished, papers already signed, and a promise he intended to keep. To bring his parents home so they'd never have to struggle again, but behind that rusted screen door he found a truth nobody had dared to tell him. His father was cutting his pills in half. His mother was hiding overdue bills and a letter she never had the courage to mail. His brothers hadn't just stopped visiting. One of them had taken the money and stolen the land out from under them. This wasn't going to be a happy reunion. This was going to be the beginning of a devastating truth. Before we continue, if this story is moving you, that support means everything. A lot of people watch these stories, but only a few actually subscribe. If you want to be one of the ones who really shows up for us, drop a like, hit subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's step into the heart of this story together. Michael Carter shut off the engine of his truck outside a small brick house on Fairview Avenue, number 42, right in the middle of the East Side Cleveland neighborhood where he'd been born. From the outside, the block looked exactly like it always had. The same corner diner with the flickering sign, the same old maple tree dropping its red leaves onto the cracked sidewalk, the same smell of damp asphalt that no other city in the world could quite copy. But something in the air felt different. Or maybe he was the one who had changed too much. He'd been gone 10 years. 10 years building something from the ground up in Chicago, hauling lumber on job sites at 28 years old, studying at night with his eyes burning from exhaustion, sleeping in a rented room with 4 other guys just to save on rent. 10 years sending money home every single month, steady as a paycheck to his brother Robert's account, always with the same message, for Mom and Dad. And Robert always answered the same way. Already gave it to them. They're doing great. Michael had believed him. Why wouldn't he? Robert was his older brother, the one who'd talked him into leaving Cleveland in the first place, back on that cold morning in March. The one who helped him carry his duffel bag to the bus station. The one who clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Go make something of yourself, kid. We'll be fine here." Now at 38, Michael Carter owned Carter Construction with active projects in 3 states and 42 people on his payroll. He hadn't come back to visit his parents. He'd come back to take them home with him. He'd already bought the apartment in Lincoln Park, 2 bedrooms, big windows, a little garden space out back. The perfect place for Frank and Margaret Carter to spend their last years in comfort, not struggling. He pulled the envelope from the truck's console. Inside was cash, the apartment paperwork, and a card in his own handwriting. "I came back for you, just like I promised." He got out of the truck with the confident stride of a man returning victorious. But as he rounded the corner toward the front walkway, his steps slowed, then stopped completely. The old screen door, the one he remembered painted a cheerful green, was rusted through orange stains spreading out from the hinges to the center panel. The little flower bed by the entrance where his mother used to grow her tomatoes and her mint had dried up completely, just brown stalks left in cracked clay pots baking in the sun. Michael frowned. He told himself it was probably just a temporary thing. Older folks can't always keep up with yard work. He'd arrived just in time to fix it, that's all. He rang the bell, waited. Silence. Rang it again, harder this time. Then he heard the sound that stopped him cold. A dry, deep, rattling cough. The kind of cough that had been sitting in someone's chest for a very long time. The door opened slowly. Frank Carter appeared in the doorway. It took Michael a full second to recognize his own father. The man he remembered had broad shoulders, hands like steel clamps, a voice that commanded a room. Standing there now was a thin figure leaning slightly against the doorframe. His clothes were clean but worn thin. His eyes, once so steady, were shining with something Michael took a moment to place. It was relief. A relief so deep it looked almost like pain. "Dad!" Michael said, and his voice came out like he'd been holding that word in reserve for a very long time, waiting for the right moment to use it. "I'm here now, Dad." He stepped forward. That's when he saw, over his father's shoulder, into the living room. An old television with no signal, a table set for 1 cup of coffee, and in the kitchen beyond, his mother turning quickly to hide something. Michael didn't know yet what she was trying to hide, but something tightened in his chest like a bolt being turned slowly, deliberately, with no hurry at all. Which pain do you think would hurt worse? Finding out your parents suffered in silence, or accepting that your own brothers could have abandoned them? Drop silence or betrayal in the comments and tell us which one you think you could forgive less. Now Michael was about to see what nobody wanted him to see. Margaret Carter wiped her hands on her apron before hugging her son. She did it fast, like she needed to get the motion in before he got a good look at the kitchen. But Michael had already seen enough. The cabinet doors hanging open showed barely 3 cans of soup, half a bag of rice, and a sleeve of crackers. For 2 grown adults, that wasn't a pantry. That was the last of everything. "My boy, what a nice surprise," Margaret said, her voice full of a happiness that sounded both genuine and forced at the same time, like someone smiling while they're carrying something very heavy. "It shouldn't be a surprise, Mom. I should have come sooner." Frank lowered himself into his usual chair, the wooden rocker with the faded blue cushion. Michael didn't notice at first how carefully his father moved, like the motion cost him more than he wanted to admit. On the side table sat a glass of water and a small pill container. Michael looked at it but didn't ask yet. The 3 of them sat in the living room. Margaret brought out coffee, the one luxury still left in that house as far as Michael could tell, and served it in mismatched chipped mugs. The conversation started the way these conversations always start after too much time apart. Small questions, short answers, little laughs. The weather, Chicago traffic, whether Michael had eaten on the drive. But Michael hadn't built a construction company by being unobservant. While he talked about nothing important, his eyes swept the room with the same precision he used walking a job site, and what he saw didn't add up. The ceiling light flickered. The entry rug was patched with duct tape. The window frame had a crack sealed with folded newspaper. And on the dining room wall, where a carved wooden clock used to hang, the one his father bought at a flea market the year Michael turned 10, there was only a lighter patch on the paint. The outline of something that used to be there. "So how are Robert and David?" Michael asked, keeping his voice level. Frank and Margaret exchanged a look. It lasted less than a second, but Michael caught every bit of it. "They're busy, honey," Margaret said. "Robert's got his own thing going on out in Phoenix. David works a lot. You know how it is." "When's the last time they came by?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Not too long ago," Frank said, and the words "not too long" sounded hollow, like an empty box. Michael nodded slowly and didn't push further, not yet. Instead, he excused himself to the bathroom and used the walk down the hallway to look around. His parents' bedroom door was cracked open. He nudged it gently. The bed was made with a thin quilt for a Cleveland winter that was already creeping in at night. On the nightstand, the pill container he'd seen earlier had a twin. A second container with a handwritten label that read, "Half a pill in the morning. Stretch it." Michael stood frozen in front of those 2 words. Stretch it. His father was cutting his medication in half to make it last longer, to spend less. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathed, and walked back to the living room. Margaret was clearing the coffee cups. Michael helped her, and when he went to put a mug away in the kitchen drawer, he found tucked under a folded dish towel a stack of envelopes. He picked them up before his mother could stop him. Electric bill, water bill, phone bill, pharmacy, all stamped in red, past due. The oldest one was 4 months behind. Margaret watched him from the kitchen doorway, hands clasped in front of her chest, like someone bracing for a verdict. "Mom," Michael said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to worry you, honey. You've got your own life, your own work. You're building something big. We were managing just fine. Managing means not taking your full medication." Margaret didn't answer. She looked down at her hands. Michael put the envelopes back carefully, like they were something fragile. Then he pulled the envelope he'd brought from Chicago out of his jacket and set it on the kitchen table without a word. "Tomorrow we're going to the doctor, Dad. And to the bank. And we're paying all of this off." Frank looked at him from his chair with eyes that said more than any speech could. But before he could respond, the landline in the living room rang. Margaret went to answer it. Michael heard her voice change, instantly dropping lower, tighter, shorter. When she hung up, it took her 3 seconds to turn around. "That was Robert," she said. "He says he knows you're here. What would hurt more, finding out your parents were hiding their hunger from you or discovering your siblings just left them behind?" Comment silence or abandonment and tell us which wound you think would be hardest to forgive in your own family. That phone call from Robert was about to open a door that couldn't be closed again. Robert didn't call back that night. He didn't show up either. The phone stayed quiet after that first warning shot, like a stone dropped in water, just to measure how deep it went before jumping in. Michael slept in his childhood room in the narrow bed from his teenage years, staring at the ceiling with his eyes wide open well past midnight. By 6 in the morning, he was already awake. He got dressed quietly and went out to the backyard with a cup of coffee. The yard he remembered with fruit trees and a concrete picnic table, where the family used to eat on Sundays, was now a small, neglected patch of dirt. But what really caught his attention was the back fence line where there used to be a gate leading to a wide, empty lot. The lot his father had bought with 20 years of savings, planning to build a second house on it someday. Now there was a new wall, unpainted concrete block, recent. Someone had sealed that access off completely. Michael set his coffee cup down on the edge of the utility sink and walked over slowly. He ran his hand along the blocks. The concrete was less than 2 years old. He could tell by the color and the texture. 20 years building a company had made him able to read a wall the way other people read a calendar. He went back inside just as Margaret was starting breakfast. Michael sat down at the kitchen table and waited for her to sit across from him. "Mom, I need you to tell me the truth. Not what you want to spare me from, the truth." Margaret kept stirring the eggs in the pan for another moment. Then she turned off the stove, sat down, and folded her hands on the table. "Where do you want me to start?" "Start with the back lot." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted in her expression. The mask of calm strength had slipped just enough to show what was underneath. Years of exhaustion. Robert said it was to avoid some kind of inheritance tax, that if it went into his name legally, it would be easier for everyone later on. Your father signed because Robert explained it to him so many times, and your dad, well, he hasn't understood paperwork the same way since his heart episode. When was that? 2 years ago. Michael felt that piece of information land like a physical blow. His father had had a heart problem, and nobody had told him. Why didn't anyone call me? Margaret looked at him with a tenderness that ached. "I did call you, honey." Michael frowned. "I never got a call about that." "I didn't say it exactly like that, but I called. I called you so many times." She got up and went to the drawer where she kept her personal things, pulled out a small spiral notebook, and set it in front of Michael. Every page had dates and phone numbers. Michael recognized his own number. The dates spanned 2 full years. At the end of each line, Margaret had written one word: fine. "Every time you called and asked how we were doing, I told you fine. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget I'd talk to you. So I could feel close to you even if it was just that." Michael counted the entries silently. 47. 47 calls where his mother had told him everything was fine while the land disappeared, while the bills piled up, while his father cut his pills in half. "Why, Mom?" "Because you had something you were building, and I wasn't going to be the one who tore it down." She paused. "But also because I was scared." "Scared what?" "That if I told you everything, you'd come running. You'd drop your job, your whole life, and then somewhere down the line you'd blame me for it. Or you wouldn't even realize you were blaming me. Kids do that sometimes, even when they don't mean to." Michael didn't answer right away. He looked at the notebook at those 47 entries with that one word at the end. Fine. Fine. Fine.
He stood up, walked into the living room where Frank sat with his cup of tea, and knelt down in front of him, the same way he used to as a kid when he wanted his father to explain something important.
"Dad, did you sign papers for the back lot?" Frank looked at him for a long moment, then said in a very quiet voice, "They told me it was to protect all of us, that you'd be covered too."
He looked down at his hands. "I signed because it was your brother asking me. And you don't think your own son could—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Michael took his father's hand between both of his and stayed there saying nothing, while in his head a question was starting to take shape, one that would change the direction of everything. How much more had his father signed without really knowing what it said? If you were Michael, what would hurt worse? Discovering 47 small, well-meaning lies, or learning that your own brother deceived your parents? Drop silence or betrayal in the comments and tell us why. But once Michael started digging into the money, he'd uncover a betrayal even bigger than he expected. Michael spent the next morning at the bank. He went alone, without telling his parents exactly where. He said he had some errands to run and would be back before noon. The branch was 8 blocks away. It was the same bank where Frank had held an account for 30 years. Michael knew the account number by heart because it had been the destination for his transfers for a decade, not directly but through Robert, who received the money and was supposed to pass it along. He went in, asked to speak with an account representative, and showed his ID. He explained he was Frank Carter's son, here to review recent activity for family reasons. The representative, a young guy with glasses and a loosened tie, typed for a moment, then turned the screen slightly toward him. "What time period would you like to look at?" "The last 3 years?" What Michael saw on the screen didn't completely surprise him. He'd already started imagining something like this. But seeing it confirmed in actual numbers was different. The transfers he'd sent monthly showed up clearly for the first 5 years. Then there was a stretch where the amounts started shrinking, and for the last 2.5 years, the deposits into the family account had dropped to almost nothing. Medical costs, utility bills, the pharmacy, all of it had been covered by Frank's minimum Social Security check. $430 a month. Michael's transfers $1,500 a month for 10 straight years had never reached that account. Michael thanked the representative, walked out of the bank, and made it half a block to a concrete bench under a tree. He sat down. He didn't think about anything for a full 2 minutes. He just let the midday sun warm his face while his mind sorted through what he'd just confirmed. $180,000. That was, in round numbers, what he'd sent over 10 years, and none of it had ever made it to his parents. When he got back to the house, Margaret was in the backyard hanging up laundry. Michael waited for her to finish and called her into the living room. "Mom, did Robert ever give you money from me? Like monthly, something regular?" Margaret thought about it with visible honesty. "At first, yes. The first couple years he'd give us something. Not much, but something." She paused. "Then he said your business was having trouble, and that's why you couldn't send any more." "We understood. We never said anything because we didn't want to pressure you." Michael closed his eyes for a moment. "My business never had any trouble, Mom. I sent $1,500 every single month for 10 years. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the air in a room. Margaret brought her hand up to her mouth. Her eyes filled slowly, like a glass being poured carefully so nothing spills. This whole time. She sat down on the couch like her legs had suddenly given out. Then she did something Michael didn't expect. She didn't cry. Instead, she got up, went to her room, and came back with an old black leather Bible. She set it on the table in front of her son and opened it slowly near the very last pages. Tucked inside the book of Revelation was a manila envelope folded into quarters. Michael opened it. It was an original deed. The notary seal, the stamp, the signatures, the deed to the back lot. The one supposedly transferred to Robert's name had an irregularity that would jump out at anyone who'd spent 20 years working with property documents. Frank's signature didn't match. Not the pressure of the pen strokes, not the characteristic slant Michael had known since childhood from watching his father sign checks and contracts his whole life. It was a forgery. Did you know what you were keeping in here, Mom? I don't understand paperwork, Margaret answered calm. But I know that when something doesn't feel right, you hold on to it, just in case someone who does understand needs it someday. Michael looked at his mother for a long moment, and for the first time since arriving in Cleveland, he felt something that wasn't pain or anger. It was pride. He tucked the deed back in the envelope, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his jacket's inner pocket. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Twice. The same gray sedan, Arizona plates, tinted windows. It didn't come back that afternoon, but Michael noted it mentally with the same precision he noted everything. Gray Arizona plates, tinted glass. Robert lived in Phoenix. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, someone knocked on the door. It was Dorothy Coleman, the neighbor from across the street, carrying a covered dish with a dish towel over the top. She was 67, but she moved like she was 40 short, confident steps, and an expression that didn't ask permission before saying exactly what was on her mind. "Made some beef stew to celebrate the good son coming home," she announced, not waiting to be invited in. Margaret greeted her with a long hug. It was clear this woman had been much more than a neighbor these last couple of years. Michael understood it from the way his mother relaxed next to her. The kind of relaxation you only feel around someone who's actually been there for you. The four of them ate together. Frank talked more than he had in the past couple of days. Dorothy had a gift for making people feel comfortable without even trying, dropping blunt, dry-humored comments that made everyone laugh before they saw it coming. After lunch, once Frank had gone to lie down and Margaret was in the kitchen, Dorothy stayed behind with Michael in the living room. She looked at him directly, no beating around the bush. "You came here to find out the truth, didn't you? Not just to visit." "I came to bring them home with me, but yes, also to understand what happened." Dorothy nodded, like that was exactly what she expected to hear. "Then listen close, because I'm only saying this once and I'm not going to dress it up." What followed was 40 minutes where Michael didn't interrupt even once. Dorothy spoke with the precision of someone who'd kept every detail waiting for the moment to hand it over to the right person. Robert had stopped visiting his parents exactly 2 years and 4 months ago. She remembered because it was right before Christmas, and Margaret had cried quietly through the whole night of the 24th. David had kept coming around occasionally during the first year, but his visits were short and heavy with obvious guilt. He'd show up, glance around, leave without staying to eat. Then he stopped coming too. But what Dorothy had held on to most carefully was this. About 16 months ago, Robert had shown up one afternoon with a man carrying a briefcase. They went inside the house. They were in there less than an hour. When they came out, Robert had the look of someone who'd just closed a deal, and the man with the briefcase walked off quickly without looking at anyone. That same week, a construction crew showed up and blocked off the back lot. The workers put up that new wall in 2 days. "I asked your mom what happened," Dorothy continued. "She told me Robert explained it was some kind of paperwork to protect the property. Your dad wasn't doing great health-wise, and he signed whatever was put in front of him." "And the man with the briefcase, do you know him?" "Not by name, but I've seen him before, at the county records office. I think he's a notary, or he works with one." She pulled out her phone, an old one with a small screen, and slid it toward Michael. On the screen was a blurry photo taken from the window, the man with the briefcase from behind, next to a car. "I took that day. Didn't know if it would ever be useful." Michael studied the photo. The license plate was partially visible, Arizona, same as the gray car that morning. "It's useful," he said. Dorothy looked at him with an expression that mixed satisfaction and sadness in equal parts. "You know what bothers me most about all this?" she said, lowering her voice even though they were alone. "Your mother never once said a bad word about Robert, not once. She always found some excuse for him. Said he had his own struggles, that life hadn't gone the way he expected." She paused. "That's what good mothers do for the kids who don't deserve it. They keep loving them anyway. And that's exactly what the shameless ones count on." Michael stayed quiet. Outside, the evening was starting to settle in, and the street lights were flickering on one by one. Dorothy got up to leave, but stopped at the door and turned back. "One more thing. About 8 months ago, Robert came by alone,
without the briefcase man. He went inside, stayed maybe 20 minutes, and when he came out, your mom was standing in the doorway with her hand clenched like this. She closed her own fist to show him. Next day, I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring anymore. Michael found David at the auto repair shop where he worked in a neighborhood on the south side of Cleveland. It was a small, honest kind of place, 2 lifts, 3 cars in various states of repair, a radio blaring a ball game. David was underneath a pickup truck, legs sticking out when Michael walked in. "David." The legs stopped moving, then David slid out slowly like someone putting off the inevitable for just a few more seconds. His coveralls were stained with grease, his hands black with it. When he saw Michael, he didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at him, with the eyes of someone who's been dreading something for a long time. "I knew you'd come," Michael said finally. "Why didn't you call me first then?" David wiped his hands on a rag that didn't really clean them at all. He pointed to a wooden bench beside the shop office. "Sit down." They sat together under a section of tin roof that gave partial shade. David took a while to start. Michael waited. He knew that pushing a man who's about to confess something big only makes him clam up. "I knew what Robert was doing." David started staring at the ground. "Not all of it from the beginning, but enough. And I didn't stop it." "Why?" David rubbed the back of his neck. "Because he knew something about me. Something I never told Mom or Dad." He paused for a long time. 5 years ago, I had a gambling problem, got in way over my head, ended up owing $80,000, and I had no way to pay it. I took money out of Dad's emergency savings account, the one they had set aside for medical stuff. Michael didn't take his eyes off his brother. "How much did you take?" "All of it, $72,000. David swallowed hard. "I never paid it back. I meant to. I just never found the right moment. And then time kept passing." He let the sentence trail off. "Robert found out when he was going through the bank statements after Dad's heart thing. Ever since, he's told me if I don't cooperate, he'll tell Dad everything. And with Dad's heart the way it is..." "What did he ask you to do in exchange for keeping quiet?" "Sign some papers. He told me it was to reorganize the property, that nobody was going to lose anything, that it was just paperwork. I signed because I didn't really understand what it said, and because I was scared." He looked up for the first time. "I found out later those papers gave him legal control of the lot. By then, it was too late. And the sale..." David clenched his jaw. "He promised me 30%, said the land was appraised at $300,000, and after all the legal fees, I get $90,000. A bitter pause. When it all closed, he texted me saying the notary fees had eaten up almost everything, and there was only $12,000 left for me. I told him that wasn't what we agreed on. He blocked my number." Michael processed every word in silence. "David, do you have copies of any of those documents?" His brother looked at him with a strange expression, part shame, part something like hope. "Yeah." He got up, went into the shop office, and came back with a thin folder. "I kept them because something told me I'd need them. Not for me. For this." He handed it over. "I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything. What I did was just as bad as what Robert did, for different reasons. But if you can use this to help Mom and Dad use it..." Michael took the folder. "What you did with Dad's money has to come out into the open, David. Not today, but it has to." David nodded, head down. "I know. I accept that." He looked up. His eyes were red. "How are they doing?" Dad splits his pills in half to make them last. Mom has 47 phone calls written down in a notebook. Robert pawned Mom's wedding ring. David closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "Tell me what you need me to do." Michael hired an attorney the next day. Not the first one he found in a local directory, but one recommended by his own corporate lawyer back in Chicago. Attorney Diane Mitchell, a property litigation and family law specialist with an office in Lincoln Park. The meeting was that afternoon. Michael arrived with 3 things: the forged deed his mother had kept in the Bible David's folder, with the coerced documents, and a handwritten summary of everything Dorothy had told him, including the blurry photo of the man with the briefcase. Attorney Mitchell read through everything without interrupting. She was a woman in her 50s, short hair, economical gestures, and a way of reading contracts like she was taking them apart piece by piece. When she finished, she squared up the papers carefully on her desk. Your father's signature is forged. That's the first thing, and the most important. She pointed to a specific spot on the deed. The pen pressure here doesn't match the original signature on his driver's license. A handwriting expert could confirm it within a week. She moved to the next document. And this one, David signed under duress. If David testifies and provides the communications where Robert threatened him, texts, calls, whatever, exists, that invalidates his voluntary participation and makes him a witness, not a principal accomplice. She paused. Does he have those messages? David kept text messages of Robert threatening him. I looked through them this morning. The attorney nodded. Good. Now here's the complicated part. She crossed her arms on the table. Your brother tried to push this through the local county records office. I ran a check this morning and there's a problem. The original transfer file has a receipt stamp that doesn't match the notary's registered filing number. Someone altered the filing number after it was recorded, which means somebody inside the system was involved. Exactly. Which is why we're not filing through the local office. We're going straight to the State Land Division and Civil Court, bypassing the local counter entirely. Michael listened to everything closely and took notes in a small notebook. When Attorney Mitchell finished explaining the strategy, he asked the question he'd been saving. How long will it take to reverse the transfer? Between 2 and 4 months, if there's no injunction filed in between. Robert could hire someone to file one just to buy time. She looked at him directly. Do you know where your brother is right now? Phoenix. I have a partial plate number for a car linked to someone who worked with him on the paperwork. I need that plate number. Michael gave it to her from memory. Diane Mitchell wrote it down without blinking. That night back at his parents' house, Michael sat in the kitchen after Frank and Margaret had gone to bed. He opened his laptop and pulled up his own bank transfer records from the last 10 years. He organized them into a table. Date amount receiving account number, $180,000. That was the exact total. Then he searched public property records online for Robert Carter's name as a property owner. He found 3 listings in Phoenix: a condo near the Water District, a retail storefront downtown, and a luxury vehicle from the previous year, all purchased within the last 3 years. Michael closed the laptop slowly, turned off the kitchen light, and in the darkness before getting up, he heard his father's cough from the bedroom down the hall. That same dry cough he now recognized as the sound of missing medication, of cold air coming through a window with a broken seal, of 2 years of neglect that nobody had seen because nobody had wanted to look. The next morning, while they were eating breakfast, the landline rang again. This time, Michael was the one who answered. The voice on the other end was Robert's, and it sounded different now. Not calm anymore. It sounded like someone who'd just found out his brother's attorney had made inquiries at the county office that very morning. Michael, I think we need to talk, you and me. Talk like brothers, Michael repeated flatly. Fine, talk. Robert cleared his throat on the other end. Not on the phone. Come see me, or tell me where you are and I'll come to you. This is a family misunderstanding, Michael. There's no need to bring in lawyers or make some big scene that hurts Mom and Dad. When's the last time you saw Mom and Dad, Robert? Brief silence. I've had problems. Life isn't easy. You know how it is. Another pause, longer. It's been a few months. 2 years and 4 months, Michael said. That's not a few months. And the problems you're talking about include a piece of land that's not Dad's anymore, a pawned wedding ring, and medication your father cuts in half because he can't afford the full dose. Robert's voice shifted. It got lower, more urgent, like someone realizing the ground under him isn't as solid as he thought. Michael, I can explain all of that. There's context you don't know. Karen and I have been going through something really difficult financially. I don't care about context, Robert. I care about the outcome, And the outcome is that my parents are alone, sick, and broke while you've got a condo near the water in Phoenix, a storefront downtown, and a brand new car. A pause. All bought in the last 3 years. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was the silence of someone who just realized the other person knew a lot more than he thought. "What do you want, Michael?" "Nothing from you for now. We'll talk when it's time." He hung up. He stood there with the phone in his hand for a moment, then set it down on the table and went to his parents' room. Margaret was making the bed. Michael sat on the edge and waited for her to finish. "Mom, Dorothy told me about the ring." Margaret kept smoothing the blanket without stopping. "I figured she would." She finished smoothing it out and sat down in the chair by the window, the spot where she always sat to say her morning prayers. "He came, saying he needed money urgently, that Karen was sick, that the doctors were expensive." She paused. "What a mother feels when a child asks for help, you can't just switch that off, Michael. Even if that child hasn't visited in 2 years, even if deep down you know something doesn't add up, you still give it to him because he's your son, and the alternative is shutting the door on him, and that hurts even more." Michael nodded slowly. Karen was sick. Weeks later, I found out from an acquaintance that Karen was perfectly healthy, that they'd gone on a trip to Florida that same month. She said it without drama, like just one more fact in a long list of facts she'd learned to carry. Michael stood up, went to the living room, and opened the drawer where he'd found the bills that first day. He searched until he found what Margaret had mentioned, without quite saying it directly. A cream-colored envelope with his name and his Chicago address written in his mother's careful, rounded handwriting. It was sealed, stamped, ready to mail. He picked it up and went back to the bedroom. "Mom, this is what I think it is." Margaret looked at the envelope. Her eyes stayed on it for a long moment. "I wrote that 8 months ago, the night Robert took the ring. I was so tired that night I thought I couldn't keep carrying all of this alone anymore." A soft pause. "But the next morning I got up, made breakfast, and thought if I sent you that letter you'd drop everything and come, and then it would be my fault that you lost everything you worked so hard for. Can I open it?" "It's yours, honey. It always was." Michael opened the envelope carefully. 3 pages written on both sides in his mother's handwriting, small at the beginning, bigger and less steady toward the end. Like her hand had started losing control as she wrote. He read it in silence. Margaret looked out the window. When he finished, Michael folded the pages back up, tucked them into the envelope, and placed it in his chest pocket next to the forged deed. Outside, they heard a car engine pull up in front of the house. It was Robert. He got out of the car with the practiced confidence of someone who'd rehearsed his entrance in front of a mirror. Casual clothes, clean shoes, hair combed back. His arms slightly open like he was walking into a hug instead of a confrontation. Michael waited for him at the door. The 2 brothers looked at each other for a second that lasted much longer than a normal second usually does. Robert attempted a smile. Michael gave nothing back. "Brother?" Robert said, extending his hand. Michael didn't take it. "Come in. Mom and Dad are in the living room." Robert walked in. When he crossed into the living room and saw his parents, his expression shifted for a split second, something between discomfort and calculation, before smoothing back into a mask of affection. "Mom, Dad, so good to see you." He leaned down to kiss Margaret's cheek. She let him, her hands staying still in her lap. Then he turned to Frank, who watched him from his chair without moving. "Dad, you're looking good." Frank didn't respond. He just looked at him. Michael closed the door and sat down across from Robert. The folder with the documents was already on the table. Robert saw it. His eyes lingered on it for a second. Robert Attorney Mitchell already reviewed the deed for the back lot. Michael opened the folder and set the document on the table. "Dad's signature is forged. A handwriting expert can confirm it within days." Robert opened his mouth, closed it, then took the route Michael had already anticipated. "That's a misunderstanding, Michael. Dad signed it. I was right there. What happened is that his hand was bothering him from arthritis that day. That's why the stroke looks different." I also have the messages where you threatened David to get him to sign under duress. Michael placed the second sheet on the table. And the bank records showing that the money I sent for 10 years never reached Dad's account. Robert shifted in his seat. David's lying. He was always the weak one, always looking for, "The lot is tied to a filing with an altered notary number," Michael continued, his voice steady. "Someone inside the county records office was involved in that. This isn't a family matter anymore, Robert. This is a criminal one." The silence that followed was different from all the others. Robert looked at the folder, looked at Michael, looked at his parents, and then he did exactly what Michael had calculated he would do once he ran out of options. He turned to Frank, eyes wet. "Dad, I made mistakes, I'll admit that, but I'm your son, your oldest son. Are you really going to let your youngest destroy me over some paperwork? Everything we've been through together, none of that counts for anything but—" Frank listened in complete silence. Michael didn't speak either. Margaret sat with her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white. Robert kept going, his voice cracking convincingly. "Karen pushed me into a lot of this. I didn't want to do things this way, but she convinced me it was the only way out. I love you both. I've always loved you. If I made mistakes, it was because I was desperate, not because I don't love you." Frank waited for his oldest son to finish, then slowly, with the visible effort of someone gathering strength to speak, he sat up straighter his chair. When he spoke, his voice was low, but it didn't waver once. "Loving someone and abandoning them don't go together, Robert. Loving someone and stealing from them don't go together. Loving someone and lying to them, that doesn't go together either." He paused. "What you didn't do out of desperation. You did it because you thought there'd never be any consequences, that we were old and nobody would ever come around asking questions." Robert tried to interrupt. "Dad, I'm not finished." Frank raised a hand. "Michael isn't the one destroying you. The consequences of what you did yourself are catching up to you. That's different." He lowered his hand slowly. "I don't have anything else to say to you today." At that moment, Robert's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. His face changed into something Michael had never seen in his older brother before. Real, unguarded fear. It was a text from Karen. "Robert, the district attorney's office called me in this morning. My lawyer says I need to cooperate to protect myself. I'm sorry." Robert left the house without another word. The car pulled away down Fairview Avenue faster than it had arrived. Michael watched him go from the doorway, then closed it slowly. No slamming, no dramatic gesture. Robert's story wasn't over. There would be legal proceedings, months of paperwork, statements and counterstatements. But the part that depended on this house, on this living room, on these 4 people, that part was finished. He sat back down with his parents. The 3 of them stayed quiet for a while. Nobody bothered to measure. Margaret looked at her hands. Frank stared out the window. Michael watched them both with the same attention he'd learned to use reading a job site, looking for what the materials say when nobody's asking them directly. It was Margaret who broke the silence first. "So what happens now, honey?" "Now Attorney Mitchell files the case next week with the original deed, David's messages, and Karen's statement. The process to reverse the land transfer takes 2 to 3 months." He paused. "The lot goes back into Dad's name. And you 2 are coming with me to Chicago." Margaret looked at him. "This house stays yours. Nobody's taking it away. But while the legal process plays out, it's better if you're with me. Besides," Michael paused for a moment, "Dad needs medical care he isn't getting here." Frank turned his gaze from the window. "I don't want to be a burden, Michael. Dad, you spent 40 years laying brick so other people could live comfortably inside those walls. Everything I am, I learned watching you get up before dawn, rain or shine." Michael searched for the right words. "Letting me help you now isn't a burden. It's the only thing that makes any sense." Frank didn't answer right away. He looked at Margaret. She gave the smallest nod, that silent kind of communication that 50 years of marriage doesn't need words for. "All right," Frank said finally. That same afternoon, Michael went to the pawn shop Dorothy had told him about, the one where Robert had taken the ring. He checked 3 pawn shops before finding it. The third one had the ring on display with a price tag. It was a simple 10-karat gold band with a date engraved on the inside. March 14, 1978, his parents' wedding day. Michael paid without haggling. The jeweler wrapped it in tissue paper. That night, after the 3 of them had dinner together, Margaret had made pot roast. The first real home-cooked meal in months, she said. Michael waited until his father was settled comfortably in his chair, then walked over to his mother in the kitchen. He set the small wrapped package on the table without saying anything. Margaret looked at it, picked it up, slowly unwrapped it. When she saw the ring, she didn't say anything for several seconds. She just held it between her thumb and finger, staring at the engraving with the look people get when they're reading something they know by heart, but need to confirm is still there.
How did you find it?
Dorothy told me everything, Mom. Margaret slid the ring onto her finger. It fit exactly like always. She looked up at Michael, and in her eyes there was something that wasn't just gratitude. It was the recognition of someone who could finally set down something very heavy she'd been carrying.
Thank you, honey, she said quietly.
Don't thank me, Mom. This was already yours. The next day they packed up what they needed. Michael loaded the suitcases into the car. Margaret turned off every light, shut off every faucet, and at the last moment went alone back into the living room. She walked to the edge of the side table where the Bible sat and took it with her. Frank came out last, paused in the doorway, and looked back into the house once, with that expression people get when they're saying goodbye to a place without knowing if they'll ever be back. Then he turned toward Michael, who was waiting by the car. He walked over slowly, without leaning on the wall, without asking for help. When he reached his son, Frank raised his arms and hugged him. Michael felt in that embrace his father's thin bones, the smell of bar soap and old wood, the slight tremble of his hands against his back. There were no words. None were needed. In the car, as Cleveland disappeared behind them in the rearview mirror, Margaret looked out the window with the ring on her hand, turning it slowly between her fingers. Frank dozed off his head, resting against the glass. Michael drove in silence for a while. Then, on the highway, he reached into his jacket pocket with one hand and pulled out the envelope, the letter his mother had never sent, and set it on the dashboard where he could see it. It wasn't a letter with no destination anymore. It was proof of everything that had been waiting for him to come home and finally claim it. Months later, the lot legally returned to Frank Carter's name. Robert was sentenced for fraud, forgery, and breach of trust. David, true to his word, confessed in front of his parents, paid back the money he'd taken little by little, and started visiting every Sunday not to beg forgiveness with speeches, but to prove it through showing up. In Chicago, Frank and Margaret's life changed shape. Medical treatment stabilized Frank's heart. Margaret started growing mint tomatoes and peppers again in the small garden of the apartment. Some evenings, Michael would come home from work and find them sitting together, sharing a cup of coffee, like the years of neglect had never managed to break what really mattered. One night, Margaret handed Michael the letter she'd never sent. "I don't want you to keep it like a wound anymore," she told him. "Keep it like a promise." Michael read it once more and understood that his parents' love had never been silence out of a lack of caring. It had been sacrifice carried too far for too long. Then he tore open the envelope, but he kept the last page where his mother had written, "No matter how long it takes, this will always be your home." Sometime later, Michael built a small senior living residence back in Cleveland. He named it Frank and Margaret House. It didn't take in elderly residents as numbers on a chart, but as people whose stories still deserved to be heard. On opening day, Frank took his son's hand and said, "Now you've finally built the most important thing you'll ever build." Michael looked at his parents, then at the families gathered around them, and understood finally that coming home was never about going back to a place. It was about finally making it home together.